Hi, my name is Freya Serafina, and I'm a PhD student in women's spirituality. And I just passed my first comprehensive exam. And I am so freaking excited because I was so stressed about this for so long. I thought I was going to fail, and I passed, and I did really well, actually. So I'm going to talk about what that means, but more importantly, I'm going to talk about the content of my comprehensive exam, which you can maybe gather from the title of this video. So it's different for everyone, but for my program, you need to do 2 comprehensive exams. And basically, passing a comp gives you permission to move forward with your dissertation proposal and then subsequent candidacy if you pass the proposal. So I have to take these 2 exams, and for us, these exams are papers. So we read 30 books and 5 articles. You can do like a book article equivalent thing. And you have to write 35 to 50 pages of a literature review for the first one, and advanced methodologies comp for the second one, which I'm not even thinking about yet because I'm really scared. But you have to do all of that in 15 weeks. So it was a lot of work, and I'm really glad it's done. But I kind of had a lot of fun along the way because I picked things that I was interested in, some of them a little familiar with, and one completely unfamiliar with. So that allowed me to work a little less in some places and stay interested in others. So I focused for my literature review on women in world religions, and I was looking at how women create spaces of power within religious context. So, as the title suggests, I looked at priestesses and oracles in ancient Greece and Rome. I looked at shamans in South Korea, and I looked at Christian women in Ireland. My research was situated within 2 complementary sets of research texts. So one section was historical accounts of women's roles in religious contexts, and the other section was a more modern feminist reexamination of those roles and actually how much women contributed to their respective societies through religious affiliation. The ancient Greco-Roman world was full of women who practiced divination in varying forms. The Greek oracles carve out spaces of power through their ability to commune with and speak for the gods. Divination played such a crucial role in Greek society, from the personal to the political, that priestesses were revered and seen as authority figures. Johnston and Struck tell us that divination reflects the ways in which Greeks constructed their world. And the world of the gods was paramount. Priestesses and oracles were fully embodied conduits for the gods, allowing for the transfer of authority from the gods to the women. And there was one woman to rule them all. Not really, but Lord of the Rings reference. And she was the Pythia at Delphi. So the Temple of Delphi housed up to 6 Pythias at any given time, and Pythia is a title given to the main oracle or the main priestess who is operating within the temple. So it's not her name, but what she is called. People came from all over the country and other countries to seek out her prophecies. Socrates even remarked towards the end of his life that he set upon his philosophical journey thanks to a message from the Pythia earlier in his career. Sidebar, there was a shit ton of beef and pettiness between the Pythia and freelance seers at the time. The Pythia would use her political authority to force seers to renounce their seer bloodlines. And she supplanted people called oikos in different city-states that were developing in order to have her political and religious reach grow further and further. Girl had authority. Seers were not always, but most often men, whereas the Pythia was always a woman. The coolest account of the Pythia, however, comes from William J. Broad. Him and some other scientists and researchers, they set out to conduct a series of experiments to try and finally get to the bottom of the cause of the Pythia's prophetic visions. And what they discovered was ethylene gas. And in order to do so, they set up this experiment like out in someone's garage, and they like pumped it with ethylene to like see what would happen. And like someone's wife or like neighbor, she agreed to like be the test dummy and like went in there. Can you imagine like your neighbor comes over and they're like, hey, we're running a scientific experiment to see if this ancient priestess was having hallucinations or not. Do you want to come into my backyard, into my shed? And you say yes? That would be me. That would be me. I'd say yes. Would you? So Broad suggests, based on that research, that the Pythia's ability to enter altered states was due in part to the inhalation of ethylene gas. However, and I really appreciate this about his research, Broad comments that regardless of how the Pythia brought about her divine revelations, be it from inhaling gas or hearing the words of the gods, it doesn't negate her political power, reach, influence, and renown that lasted for thousands of years. Indeed, he states that the discovery of ethylene intoxication took nothing from her cultural or religious side, nothing from her long history. The high was not an end in itself, but a starting point, a stimulus. This stimulus enabled these religious women to act as conduits for divine communication and play central roles in the religious life of ancient Greece. And I think that's pretty damn cool. In Rome, we have priestesses known as the Vestal Virgins. One of the favorite things that I read comes from Molly M. Lindner, and she says that art preserves what history does not, suggesting that many ancient historians overlooked writing about the Vestal Virgins for misogynistic reasons. Lindner argues that the significance of these Roman priestesses was so paramount that they were memorialized in art and stone. One such priestess being Flavia Publicia. Flavia Publicia served as chief vestal in the 3rd century, and she was honored with 7 exceptionally large bases used to uphold a standing statue of the priestess. These inscriptions were made in Flavia's honor by her family members, clients, and the freedmen who had previously worked for her. The inscriptions were emphatic and spoke of her merit and dedication as a vestal, providing us with a glimpse into the honor surrounding Vestal Virgins in ancient Rome. And I tend to agree with that, right? I mean, if we think about art, film, music, television, media, whatever it is, in modern times, we're taking pictures of things that we care about. We're writing music about things that we like. We're making film based on our real life experience, based on a feeling. We create art not just to convey messages, to be reflective of the time, but because we like it, or there's something we want to memorialize by taking a photo of it. Well, they did that with stone, and there are so many statues, busts left of these women because they were so significant to the society in which they operated. On to Ireland. Ireland's history with Christianity is long and complicated, and where we find syncretism between paganism and Christianity is also extensive. That was not the focus of my paper or the focus of my research. So before you ask me, no, I did not explore those topics, but if you would like recommended readings, I'm happy to provide them. Let me know in the comments below. What's interesting about the Irish Catholic nuns that I studied, primarily between 1750 and 1900, is that most of them were wealthy women who came from wealthy families who used their influence and contacts to build convents, schools, orphanages, and in that way, they extended their reach socially and politically, and helped Catholicism to grow throughout the country. And Mother Gould was one of them. By the time of her death, Mother Gould established 12 convents. Women like Gould are responsible for initiating and sustaining the development of the modern conventual movement in Ireland. Their influence spread far and wide, promoting religious rituals and the inclusion of children in these rituals. But Gould wasn't the first, or certainly the last, to use their religious authority to influence social and political agreements. My favorite story from my research comes from Maeve Bridget Callan, and it's the story of an abbess from the 8th century named Samthan. Samthan? I don't know. Samthann. Samthan. Probably. Well, anyway, she was really tough, but she really cared for the women that she had in her care. And one time, a cleric came to visit the abbey, and he took advantage of one of the nuns. And as he was leaving, she magically, or through the power of God, whatever you'd like to say, made an eel come out of the water and latch onto his penis and bite him until he begged for forgiveness. It's one of our very, very early accounts of girl bossing in the wild. I also read a ton about the fight for women's ordination in Ireland and the subsequent first ordination of a woman priest in the Anglican Church in 1990. And I also read a really cool book by Anne Francis called where she interviews a bunch of religious Christian women in Ireland, but also the first bishop to be ordained in the Church of Ireland, Pat Story. And Story says that she feels that she brings a different approach to ministry than her male counterparts, because women and families can look to her and see a bit of themselves. And I think that's a really nice sentiment to end the Ireland section on. Now, as someone who's always been interested in religion, philosophy, and magic, and the gods, especially, going to school in America, some of the first mythologies that you learn about are Greek mythology. I guess the American school system places importance, significance, and whatever on the Greek myths as they are today. So, the Pythia, the Vestal Virgins, not that I knew all of the intricacies that I know about them now, certainly not, but I had a general idea of what their function was and about the religious functions and rituals that I might find in ancient Greece and Rome. I grew up with an Irish Catholic deacon for a grandfather, and I went to Catholic school my whole life. So I was also kind of familiar with how that might look. Certainly not the history, certainly not the Anglican Church, and certainly not women's fight for ordination, which is still taking place for Irish Catholic women. But I felt like at least those were sort of in my wheelhouse, and I was just learning new things about something I had an idea about. I knew absolutely nothing about female shamans in South Korea, which is why I picked it. I felt that I wasn't exposed to enough about East Asian religions in my PhD program. And there's a shit ton of electives that one can take, but I moved pretty quickly through my coursework. I was full-time every single semester, so I'm not taking, a wide breadth of classes that I could be taking. And so I wanted to pick something that I was interested in, but I didn't really know too much about, because I had no preconceptions about what it might look like as I began my research. And I learned some really interesting things. One, I want to talk about a couple of terms. My camera died, so here I am days later trying to get this video done. This video is taking a lot longer than I would have liked it to. I apologize. But thanks for being here. So I was talking about moving into the South Korean text. So there was something that I encountered in my research that, because linguistics is not the focus of what I do, though sometimes it comes up, obviously, and it wasn't the focus of my research for this comp, I didn't really dive into this issue that I encountered. So maybe someone whose native language is Korean or is more of an insider into the culture than I am could elucidate some of these things that I encountered in the comments below. So what I found is that there are two different terms that are most readily used when talking about shamans. One of them is mudang and one of them is manshin. So my research taught me that the term mudang is often used in a derogatory sense, meant to describe a category of people who adhere to a belief in spirits, suggesting that these people are backwards and superstitious. But scholars, writers, and even shamans themselves often use this term when referring to shamanic practitioners. So I wasn't really sure if it was a kind of term where it can be used derogatorily, is that a word, derogatorily, by people who are on the outside of this culture and they're slinging it at someone meant to cause harm. But if you're an insider in the culture and you use, or an insider practitioner and you use this term, it doesn't matter because you have ownership over it. So I wasn't sure if that was the case. So if someone knows better than me, I'd love to hear about it. But manshin is another term that's widely used to describe shamans and is considered less derogatory as it speaks more broadly to folk practitioners in general. In my research, when the text used the term mudang, I just used it to alleviate confusion, and I used the term shaman and manshin interchangeably because that's how the scholars whose work I was reading and practitioners were using interchangeably. There are also two other terms that were really significant for my research, and that's kut and shibyang. I can't remember if I mentioned this in the earlier footage that I recorded, but if I'm mispronouncing something, I apologize. Again, language and linguistics isn't like my research focus, but I do my best to make sure that I'm pronouncing everything correctly. So if I'm not, please let me know, and I apologize ahead of time. I'm going to do my best. So a kut can be translated to a ritual or a ceremony, and it's a ritual performed by shamans to communicate with spirits, ancestors, and deities. Now, shibyang refers to the illness that one experiences when they're fighting the call to be a shaman. And the longer that someone ignores that call, the sicker they will become until they accept who they're supposed to be. So a really big influence on the social configuration of shamanism and the gender hierarchical configurations in South Korean society are due to the adoption and, the introduction and adoption of Confucianism. So as a philosophy, Confucianism emphasizes moral excellence, self-cultivation, harmony, and family and social hierarchies. It positions men as public-facing and in control over private-facing women. And it became the dominant ideology during the Joseon dynasty. After colonization, Korea doubled down on ideologies and practices that separated them from their oppressors, implementing strict standards of identity, social, and family hierarchies, and a push towards modernization. Ironically, this push towards modernization had serious ramifications, negative ones, on women's lives, which is what I'm going to talk about. So kut is incredibly significant, and the majority of the scholars that I looked at feel that kut is a way for women to reclaim their past, their selves, and their personhood through this spiritual ritual. Because in kut, women are in control. They are the major actors, the major players. They are the mediators between the dead, the ancestors, the gods, deities, spirits. And it is men who have a significant secondary role if they are there at all. Men will often play instruments, for example, but really this is a women's game. What's really interesting about these rituals in modern times is that they're often seen as big spectacles in modern South Korean society. So there's a lot of chanting and vocalization, and there's a lot of music, and there's colorful wardrobe and fabric that's used, and that sort of goes against this pious Confucian ideology of not being too flashy and being more poised and being more thoughtful. But what's interesting is that there's actually evidence that suggests that shamanism was integral in the creation of Korea, the state of Korea, the country of Korea, the city-state, and other Asian countries in the region. So, in a book by Sarah Millage Nelson called Shamanism and the Origin of States, Spirit, Power, and Gender in East Asia, she talks about a lot of these grave sites that have been found dating all the way back to the late Paleolithic period. So Nelson argues that shamanism was an integral part of state formation in East Asia, and that women were often political, religious, and familial leaders. So she talks about this one queen when there was a shamanic crown and belts, and they're golden, and all these other shamanic symbols, because in pre-Korea or Silla, queens were perceived to have preferential access to the highest level of the elite, and they were descended from mountain goddesses. Thus, they were shamans with access to the spirits, and these women drew their power from both their lineage of the mountain goddess and their perceived ability to convince others that they could command spirits. And so it's actually because there's grave sites of like the kings and her husband and all of that, and it is not adorned in the way that the queen is adorned. And this is really interesting to consider because women were thought, and we can go back to a lot of the other texts that I've read from other places for this, women were thought to have a direct access to the divine. They bled every month. They brought life into this world. So womb of the goddess, womb of the earth, womb of the woman. So this ability to intrinsically connect to deity was something that was cherished and celebrated in ancient times. And then things go awry, as they always do. And Meros Huang tells us all about how that went awry thanks to Japanese colonial occupation in Korea that happened from 1910 to 1945. She highlights how the government, with the help of media outlets, sought to create a modern identity free from any ideas and practices that would link them to the past. So Korea began to industrialize. And when it began to industrialize, there was a huge focus on the future and being cosmopolitan. And what happened was that things started to be centered around cities. And a lot of people from rural areas would come into the cities looking for work. And so what the media did, newspaper outlets, journals, they painted these rural women as being backwards and flashy and poor and uneducated. And they equated those women to shamans and shamanistic practices. And they went a step further. And there was a whole campaign about how if you as a woman sought the services of a shaman for women's issues, childbirth, and something happened, it was all your fault for believing in backwards ways instead of being more cosmopolitan, forward thinking, and going to doctors about women's issues and birthing issues and anything to do with a newborn child. That wasn't standard. Anytime that we make a law or rule about something, it's because it was happening very often, right? And women were comfortable and used to seeking out the assistance of a shaman, not just to commune with spirits, not just to commune with the gods or their ancestors, but to help them in everyday women's issues. And we know from lots of other research and history that things that have to do with the female body are usually one of the first things to be relegated for whatever reason. If you do something natural and it involves other women and a spiritual practice that feels good in your body, has to do with bleeding and womb space and babies, the government is going to say witchcraft or something similar, whatever that society's witchcraft might be. For this time period, it was backwards and superstitious, and it meant that you were uneducated and that you were backwards if you sought the services of a shaman to handle anything that has to do with traditionally being a woman. But there were also a majority of scholars who, because of all these issues surrounding shamanism, they believed that shamanism and kut and these rituals that deal with women and women's spiritual practices are actually a really great blueprint for anti-colonial reclamation of indigenous traditional spiritual practices in South Korea. And I agree. When we reclaim practices that keep us in community with one another, we're saying that all the separation that is created in the world, patriarchy, racism, misogyny, capitalism, genocide, war, all of these things, if we were to live in community with one another and practice our indigenous spiritual communal practices, we would be a stronger force against all of these division creating tactics and government agencies and blah, blah, blah. So I agree. That's a video for another time. One of the most interesting group of texts that I read for the literature review for South Korea were the mythological origins of Korea, the formation of Korea, and of Mago, the great mother goddess. So the mythical origins of the world are presented to us in the Budoji, a tale of the divine city of ancient Korea. The original text was said to be transcribed by a keeper of the Budoji traditions called Jeseng Park. The text that I read, which was republished in 2013, was translated by Seo Choi and contains commentary and analysis by Sungji Choi. The mythological tale presented to us in the Budoji offers an alternative mystical and goddess-descended history that feels at odds with the current marginalization of women and shamans in modern society. So, what is interesting about the belief and the archaeological findings from Sarah Millage's book about the formation of the city-states in Korea is that the queens were considered to be descended from a mountain goddess. And in the Budoji, we see the formation of the world, how Mago, the great mother goddess, creates three more goddesses. She's a progenitor. She creates them from her body. She doesn't need the assistance of a man. Queen. And they inhabit the earth, and all of these clans are created in all these different tribes, right? And then, of course, like Eve in the garden, in some other people's religious texts, it's Adam, just saying. One of the clan's members, man in this case, creates the great sin of eating grapes. So not an apple, but grapes in this tale. And because of that, division begins. And so the Budoji chronicles that division and all these different stories. It reads very much like a Christian mythology would. And it also talks about um, what happens after we pass away. It details how these clans had to spread across the earth and come together like every year, every so often to meditate and to repeat the original instructions from Mago so that they won't forget what they're trying to get back to. Mago Shun, Mago Land, Mago's um, uh, heavenly realm. And in the Budoji, the work of the shamaness is sacred. And so we have this mythological text that's lining up with a lot of archaeological evidence, literary evidence. And I always think stuff like that is really interesting because the danger of a single story is that what everyone else believes becomes demonized and wrong, right? But if we were to look at all of our single stories, we would see hints and clues that actually mirror one another's stories. And we also find the evidence plain as day for divine feminine erasure in all of these patriarchal monotheistic stories as well. Because if you look at those texts, goddesses are always mentioned. And they're always mentioned to say something to the effect of, destroy her temple, destroy her idols, do not worship her. So what the people in the Budoji are trying to do is get back to Mago. And whether you call the Divine Mother Mago, Gaia, Inanna, whoever she might be, we should all strive to get back to her. And that is my mantra for today. I read another text that focused on Mago by Dr. Helen Hyesu Kwang, and she wrote The Mago Way, Rediscovering Mago, the Great Goddess from East Asia. And I read volume 1. There's more than one. And actually, I'm participating in Dr. Huang's She Divine Studies conference this weekend. I'm presenting a more detailed thought out research paper on the great goddess, the mother goddess, the triple goddess being the original Holy Trinity, and some of the negative effects of that divine feminine erasure. And I will link information. I will link that in the box below. You can see all of the presenters, all the different things they're doing. It's running from Friday to Sunday. And I'm presenting Saturday at 11 a.m. EST, so I hope to see you there. Anyway, Flowers of Fire, the inside story of South Korea's feminist movement and what it means for women's rights. And this is the first book of its kind published in English. And it's written by Haewang Jung, who is a journalist. And she situates women's spiritual and religious reclamation through shamanism in real-world contemporary contexts. Because what Flowers of Fire does is it shows us the political, legal, activist, secular backdrop for women's search for self and power within South Korean life. So I looked at all these things, right, about religious women's activities in South Korea, and I'm like, well, what are they up against now? What's happening now? And the feminist movement in South Korea is insane. Women are straight up just not having babies until men will change their behavior. So it was a really difficult book to get through, and I listened to the audiobook, which was somehow probably worse because you could hear it in a woman's voice about the rape, the sexual assault, the upskirt photography and videography. There's like whole websites dedicated to like upskirt videography, the women who found themselves on those websites, the women who have stalkers, what it's like for women in the workforce at these company parties where they're forced to drink too much and their boss puts their hand on their leg or their shoulder or their breasts. I mean, it was a really, really difficult read, but it was so fucking inspiring. The women who are fighting against these structures and this harm and these activists and the organizations that they're creating. And also there was a section in the book about how that has spread to other countries like Japan. I mean, it's a horribly devastating read and a really necessary one. A really necessary one. And it will inspire you with the tales of these women. It really will. So my overall conclusion when and again, these are just snippets of what's going on, but my overall conclusion of all these texts is that across time, space, geographical and social locations, language, culture, women have been creating spaces of power within religious constructs for time immemorial. But what we still see here within patriarchal constructs for all three of these places is that women held significant spiritual and religious power. Women trust women. Women go to women. Women need a space, religiously, spiritually, and otherwise, where they can come to women with their issues, their problems, bleeding, birthing, aborting, post-birthing care, pre-birthing care. Women need an image of the goddess. They need an image of the divine that they can see themselves in. And when women have religious power, they are influential in society, they're influential in politics, they're influential in their communities, and they hold great personal power as well. And a woman who stands in her personal power is dangerous. And so society will create rules and regulations and laws that seek to suppress them. They'll create campaigns that speak poorly of them. They're not behaving like good women because they're out preaching the gospel in the street. They're being forward facing. They're not behaving like good women because they are communing with their families still. I'm thinking of Vestal virgins. They're supposed to cut their families off, but they're getting involved in politics instead. And that women's power can also be used against them. So for the Vestal virgins, if something wrong were to happen in the society, someone could turn and point the finger and say, it's her fault. Let's bury her alive, which is what happened. And it was almost impossible to be able to prove you did it, because someone could say, well, the gods told me. And really, they just want to get rid of that bitch. In South Korea, women are fighting to be heard. They are fighting to be heard and seen. And shamans are reclaiming their ancestral power, their ancestral lineage, their power and lineage as a woman descended from the mountain goddess, as just the woman in general, and what that personal power looks like set against the backdrop of the society in which they live. It was a really cool deep dive into the research. Here are things I would have done differently. Here is my advice to you when you're doing a comprehensive exam. Again, I'm in the humanities. That's going to look different for everyone. I gave myself a hard time. I gave myself too much work. I picked 3 vastly different regions, different religions, different religious structures, different societal structures, different time period, different languages. I don't recommend doing that. The comments I got in the beginning a lot was like, why these places, why? And I only had personal reasons for them, and personal reasons for them is really not enough in a comprehensive exam. You need to have academic reasons, research reasons for why these 3 things should be talked about in the same conversation. My hope was to demonstrate that women across time and space have in different religions have similar experiences with creating positions of power. I found that to be true, but I could have done it so many different ways. So don't make it complicated for yourself. Pick something you're interested in. Step one, because you're going to be reading a lot about it. For me, it's 30 books and 5 articles, right? So that's a shit ton of reading you're going to be doing. Don't pick something that you don't care about. Make sure your advisor is the right advisor for the job. Mine certainly was. I wanted someone who would push me a little bit. And also, I hadn't had the opportunity to take any classes with this particular professor just because of the way my schedule was. So if there's a professor who can supervise your comp exam and you haven't been able to take classes with them, this might be a really great opportunity to do that. I also recommend starting as early as possible. So they say that you're not supposed to do any research for your exam before the semester starts. What you should be doing is researching who's talking about your topic so that right at the start of the semester, your reading list is approved. Approved. There's no question about it. There's no uncertainty, because if you start reading a book and you've read 5 fucking books and you realize this is not going to help me at all, you are screwed. You got to work. You got to go back to the drawing board, find what you're looking for. So you are going to have to do research before it's time. Because there's just not enough weeks in a semester, right? Be really, really clear on your research question and your subsections, and don't make it too hard for yourself. No one is reading this except for you and the advisor, and maybe the head of the department if they think it's good. I don't know. No one's reading this. It's not like you're coming up with an original argument and using the text to argue that point. You're coming up with a question and you're doing a literature review. So you're reading a book with your question in mind and you're going, this is what this author says about my question. You're not going, here's a thesis and I'm going to use these texts to prove it. That's not what a literature review comprehensive exam is. You're just going, all of these people say this about my topic. And then you do a conclusion about your findings. I don't know if you can see the light changing at all. It's getting so dark and scary outside, but it's my favorite kind of weather. So I'm trying to finish this up and trying to do a good job too, because I want to go out before the storm breaks. Yeah, that's my advice. Pick something that is not too difficult. Don't give yourself more work than you need to. You have a short amount of time to get this done, and you've got a lot of work that you have to do. Have your reading list ready as quickly as possible. Pick an advisor that you want to work with. Be really clear on what you are researching. And pick something you want to research for 15 plus weeks. I use Evernote so that I can also pull it up on my phone, because sometimes I do whatever is cheapest. Do I have an audiobook that I can listen to? Do I have an ebook? So sometimes my texts are in different places. Evernote I keep on my computer and I keep it on my phone. So if I'm listening, I can just jot it down and it's all over the place. Every single time that you finish reading something, do not move away. You're going to do a reflection immediately. This is what I do. I do the publishing info. So the title, the author, the publishing house, when it was published. I take notes while I'm reading. I take general reflection notes, and then I put the page number. Any single quote, I copy and paste the quote. I put the page number, so you don't actually have to go back to the text if you don't need to. And I also do my general thoughts and feelings as soon as I'm finished. Because what you'll start to notice is as you do general thoughts and feelings, you will see like a theme start to emerge. And when you start thinking about constructing the layout of your comprehensive exam, that's going to be really important. Are you doing historical? Are you doing a feminist take? Are you doing, I don't know, what did I have? Are we doing interviews, historical versus contemporary? You're going to start to see those emerge. And I never move away from the text until I've done doing that, because maybe I don't want to pick the book up again, but I've written all of my thoughts and feelings with a page number, all of the quotes that I want with a page number, my complete reflection when I'm done, the publishing information, all of that shit. And sometimes like, oh, this author quoted this other author whose work I'm also reading, so they can be in conversation with each other. Take notes. This will save you. And I also wrote in sections. So I read South Korean text first, and then I took all of my notes and I did a whole write-up of that section. So I didn't wait till I was done reading everything. Instead, I was like, I am the master of South Korean shamanism right now. I'm the master of what these texts say. That's what I'm going to focus on. Then I'm going to dump it, and I'm going to do the next section. And after I do my 3 sections, I then go through and I make sure, how does this relate to this? How does that do that? Then I can do an introduction. That's how I work. Then I do an introduction because now I know what everything says and what I've said. And then I can do a conclusion. That's my advice. That's my advice. I'm going into my advanced methodology comprehensive exam in a couple of weeks, and I am reading. I'm reading so many different things. So wish me luck. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Again, I'm presenting at a conference this weekend. I'm going to link it below. I hope you'll be there. If you really enjoyed this content, please like, comment, subscribe, put some notifications on. And if you really like this content, you can head on over to my Patreon and sign up as a member, and maybe I'll buy a cup of coffee thanks to you. So thank you. See you next time.